and say good morning.
Good morning.
Okay. My name is Alana Morris, and I'm here from Discover Writing to present information about vocabulary. Obviously, this is why you're here. What I hope by the end of the day, though, is that we look at vocabulary differently than we have before. And I think we have to look at vocabulary differently than we have before, because what's happened is we tend to keep doing what we've always done because that's what we know, but sometimes our kids aren't hanging on to the words. Is that true? We give them lots of words. We give them the list. We give them the test. We give them the practice, but then they don't hang on to it. And then we get frustrated and say, what am I doing wrong? So what we want to be about today is have a discussion, a dialogue, an exploration of words and vocabulary. The bottom line is our kids have a vocabulary, don't they? See, our kids have vocabulary. So what we're really talking about is extending their vocabulary and giving them tools for using vocabulary. I taught in Louisville for 11 years, and that was one of my most wonderful experiences ever. That's the year, you know those first beginning years? How many of you are beginning teachers? Bless you. All right. I hope to see you again and again and again. But those beginning years are when, you make all those mistakes and you fall in love with teaching, or you don't fall in love with it. And I was fortunate to be in Louisville where there's no, you don't have a choice to fall in love with teaching because you have so much support. And then I moved to Houston, where I worked full-time for the New Jersey Writing Project as a consultant. And my daughter was diagnosed with epilepsy, and I could not travel, and I think it was kind of a godsend. Someone was saying, you know what, you shouldn't be leaving that baby. So I ended up going back into the classroom, and I've taught all grade levels from second grade through seniors in high school. And that's when I taught in Louisville. I taught at Louisville High School, and I taught seniors. I taught all grade levels, and you know what, it's kind of fun, because what I've learned is they all learn the same. Isn't that true? They're in different sized bodies. Hormones are different at the middle school level, much different. All right? But those high school kids love those little stickers just as much as the second grade. As a matter of fact, they get upset if they don't scratch and sniff like their neighbor. Hey, excuse me, miss, hers is a scratch and sniff. I said, well, just share the sniffing experience. All right? When I first started doing these presentations, people asked me, how long did it take you to write this? And as a writing teacher and a writing presenter, everybody's kind of always interested in that. And so I started tallying dates. Okay, it took this long to start doing research, this long to do this. And then I had to stop, because the true answer is it took a lifetime to write this book. Because no one in their right mind sits down and just says, I'm going to write a book. What happens is you have experiences and you have learning adventures and you have dissonance in your teaching that needs fixing. And that's when you come about to have something to say. So it's a lifetime. Well, growing up, my brother is severely dyslexic, so it started very early. And as we were growing up, I knew how smart he was. Do you have kids like that? Do you have siblings like that? Even you yourself, maybe, have some kind of learning difference? Well, he was smart. He could take televisions apart, put them back together, and they'd hum with new life. It was amazing. So I'd follow him around thinking I would pick up some of that. Hey, this guy's smart. He was smart until he went to school. When he went to school, suddenly he didn't feel smart. And the phone calls would come at night. Well, if he would just work harder, if he would just apply himself. You've heard all of these things. Well, he was trying to apply himself, really he was. But for some reason, language was a huge difficulty. And it wasn't until he was in high school that he was diagnosed with dyslexia. So all those early elementary years, he struggled and struggled and struggled. Even as a young girl, I thought, there's got to be an answer out there. How do we help these kids that really struggle with language? So when I got ready to have kids myself, that first pregnancy test came back positive. I said, by golly, I've been to the New Jersey Writing Institute. I've read the research. If I just read books, if I play the Mozart, if I play the Vivaldi, my child's going to come out brilliant. So I did. Read the book. My husband thought I was crazy. I said, what are you doing? I said, I'm reading. He said, to who? I said, to the baby. See, he hadn't read the research. That's all right. Okay. So read, played the Vivaldi, and so I was incredibly excited then when Corey was very young. We were watching, what's that show, Harriet the Spy? You remember that? Okay, Harriet the Spy, she gets her little journal. Well, he was watching that, and when we got finished, we were going to Eckerd to pick up a prescription, and he saw one of those little composition notebooks. And he said, I want that. And I said, well, good. We'll get it. It had to be something good if he was going to write it. So at the age of 4, he started his first journal. He's now 13, and he's on number 28 or 29. He hides them from me now. I think he thinks I'm going to use them in a workshop or something. I don't know where he gets that idea. All right, but this is one of his journal entries from when he was at the end of his first grade year. And it worked. I said, wow, you expose kids to language and they pick it up. So right now, no one has spotted the thermal detonator at all. When I demolish it, I will use the chips inside to make a robot. Then I could use it for getting around all the time. Am I a genius or a Nimrod? Well, back then I thought, yeah, definitely genius. Now I'm voting Nimrod, okay, as he's moved into adolescence. But it really did work. And so when we had our second child, I said, well, we want 2 literate children, so let's do the same thing. Let's do the reading, let's do the music, and let's see what happens. Sure enough, at 3rd grade, what happened? Did she do okay? Sure, she got commended performance. We're all happy. Yay, isn't that great? Obviously, there's a point in me telling you that. Here's Casey's last spelling test of the year. You can just look at the score. That's all it takes. Okay? A 15. See, Casey got her uncle's gene, and she is severely dyspraxic. No struggles really reading. Her problem is in language and hanging on to phonemes and hanging on to the memory. She has a difficult time even hanging on to words for very long on these vocabulary lists because the epilepsy that she has and the dysgraphia is impacting her ability to hang on to it. So the reason I tell this story, sitting in our classroom, we have everything from the Corys to the Cases. The kids that every word they hear they hang on to, all the way to the kids that you give them the words over and over and over again and they don't seem to pick it up. Or they don't apply it in their writing. It doesn't transfer over. Here's the answer right here. This is it. It is kind of gross. It looks like a piece of chicken, but it's not. Mike Tyson let me borrow this. Okay, he was using it for therapy and he didn't need it anymore. He has other issues he's gone on to. This is of course an ear, because this is the answer to helping kids with vocabulary. We have to help them build an ear for words and language. So I have to back up by telling you a story. When I graduated from high school, I went to North Texas State University to major in music. And when I got my schedule, I looked at it. There was a lot of classes, right, for a music major, marching band, all of these different things. And one of them on there said ear training. Ear training. I said, get out. I called my mom, all right, who was funding my college adventure, and I said, Mom, I have to take a class called ear training. And she said, no. And I said, I'm serious. Okay. So I go to this class, and I said, how difficult can ear training be? Because I thought my ears were already trained. Let me just say I failed the class. I had to get a tutor. Here's why. See if you can follow this, especially those of you who maybe play an instrument. I play saxophone. Saxophone is a linear instrument. I play 1 note at a time. So I only hear 1 note at a time. All of my friends who played guitar, like Barry Lane, and played piano, they didn't even go to class. They just showed up for the test. It was so easy for them, right? Because they could hear the chords. And in the class, that's what they were asking you to hear, chord progression. I couldn't hear it. So I had to have lots of ear training. But that's how it is with many of our kids. Their ears aren't trained to pick up on the nuances of our language the way ours are as adults, especially as language arts people. Does that make sense? See, we naturally pay attention to words. How many of you drive down the road and you notice bumper stickers and you pay attention to the bulletin boards that are kind of funny and you say, wow, that's an interesting use of that word. So we have to help our kids build an ear for vocabulary. Here's what I mean by building an ear. First of all, we have to expose kids to words all the time, higher level words than they're used to. I want you to add under exposure, though, another E word, which is engagement. We don't want to expose kids to more words by just giving them more lists. That's not going to be beneficial. We want to make sure that when we're exposing kids to words, we're doing it in an engaging way. I loved it when I walked into my classroom. I don't care what classroom, science, social studies, it didn't matter. When the lights were off and the overhead was on, and you could even see the little floaties kind of floating around the room. I loved those days because it meant I could disengage. How many of you know what I'm talking about? I was like, ooh, no thinking for today. I could just sit back, copy whatever it was that I was supposed to copy. I could talk to my friend next to me about what we were going to do after school. I could really disengage. Now, first of all, we need to have a moment. We've got to have a moment before I say one more thing. All right? So everybody raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, state your name, do promise to not be offended by anything Alana Morris should say. She has never been in my classroom, and she is not talking to me personally. She is talking about a systems problem. There we go. I always feel better after doing that because I don't want anybody saying, oh, I do that, or I don't do that, because it really is a systems issue, and it's her tradition. So we go into that classroom, and there's a list. Okay, there's a list. Now, what else do you have to have? You tell me what's going to happen for this lesson. There's a list of words. What will come next? You got to have a dictionary. Or, in the content area classes, the glossary. All right? I always loved the glossary. All right? First of all, you had to teach them what a glossary was before they could use it. All right, so we have the glossary. We have this list of words. And what's next? Got to look them up. All right? So you look them up, and then what? You write them down. Okay, and when I was a kid, I didn't know which one to write down. All right, there are so many. All right, and you have to understand dictionaries are designed two ways. Some dictionaries put the oldest definition first. Some dictionaries put the most prevalent definition. So it depends on which dictionary. Check it out and see what it's with. All right, so we write the words down. We write this definition and the etymology. It's very important. Right? And then what? Very good. You use it in a sentence, and it better be a full, complete sentence. All right, by golly, we have time to kill. All right, so complete sentence, and then later down the road there will come a test, a quiz. You guys had the same teachers I had. Now, again, don't be offended because that's what we've done and that's what's worked. And I think at some point you have to do that. You have to give them the words. You have to give them the list. The problem is, though, with the overhead method of vocabulary instruction is this. I'm just going to give you a word for an example. Let's say illustrate. Kids look it up, and it says one who illustrates. Then they use it in a sentence. She was a great illustrator. Many kids can do that and never know the definition of the word. So we already know the problem. Now what's the solution? Okay, what's the solution? So when we're talking about exposing kids to words, we have to break away from just using the list model. Right? If we want to stay. Now, if we don't care if it sticks, then we're doing that because that's kind of what's happened all along. Right? So exposure and engagement are important. Then analysis. Help me out here. What are some typical ways that we help kids analyze words? Yeah, parts of speech. Break it into syllables. Synonyms and antonyms. Context clues. Okay, so we get the idea. That's the way you analyze. I would like to encourage us to analyze it even at another level. Okay, at another level. And that is to analyze it as to why did the author choose this word? And that goes into the craft. Why did the author choose this word over this word so that they're analyzing it for purpose and analyzing it for effect? And then you're really getting into craft, aren't you? And that's what we want them doing, even because if we do that when we're reading and we're analyzing words, then they'll do that when they're writing. And think about the words that they're using. Now let me give you an example, one of my favorites. I think again as language arts teachers we do this naturally. But my son, 13, you know how this is. How many of you have teenagers at home? How many of you teach teenagers? So you know what I'm talking about. Sometimes you tell them not to do things and they do it anyway. All right, like I go home, he's not supposed to have friends over the house when I'm not there. All right? But I get there and there are all these boys. But suddenly my son decided he liked these nasty frozen hamburgers. Okay? And I'm sure when they're fresh, they're good. But he wanted these White Castle burgers. I said, you know what? Trick. I said, you go with me, I'll go get you these burgers. He and his 8 friends piled into my car, and we went to the little neighborhood market to get these White Castles. Well, there on the wall, there's a posting on the wall. Okay? Now, I must share this with you because I ripped it off the wall, and you can still see the rip mark. Okay? My son was mortified. He said, put it back. Put it back, and his friend said, dude, your mom just ripped that off the wall. So I'm going to show you what I ripped off the wall. because it shows how we analyze language and words. I know it's early, okay? But this was just wonderful. I was in that kind of mood because my son, of course, saw a four-legged little dog. I saw Willy Wonka, all right? I saw Willy Wonka, and I had to have that because it shows how within 3 little words, there's so much meaning depending on your experience, right? So I was, of course, hoping for the chocolate lab dripping on me with serotonin. But that didn't happen. But then Corey started playing with the language, his friends, and they said, oh, yeah, or it could be like Easter time. You know, the hollow Easter bunny, but instead it's a dog. I said, yes, that would be good, wouldn't it? But that's what I want kids to do. I want kids to see words and not just see their definition. I want them to see the possibilities that lie beneath the word. And that's what we want to be about. So sometimes job 1 is motivating the kids. We have to be excited if we want kids to be excited. Okay? So the last part of the year is most critical, and I think it's what we do least of. And that is rehearsal and review. Now, by rehearsal and review, we don't mean just testing them over and over again, but that we revisit the word. We revisit the language. And I tell kids, the words we learn in the class this year that you're learning in your classes, just being exposed to those words isn't what's most important. What's most important is the residue that's left over. Does that make sense? Okay, it's the residue that's left over. Otherwise, it's like this. Those are those words, infinitesimal, vapid, defunct. Did everybody see those words that I exposed the kids to? Let me just give you a few more. There are some more words. I gave it to them. I exposed it to them. But those of you that can see, what do you see? They're gone. Okay? I want to show you one of the strategies for analysis, and it's called the syllable squat. Okay, the syllable squat. And so if you would for a second, stand up. First of all, one of the things I discovered that's incredibly important for language study and analysis is syllables. Kids need to know syllables. And where I first learned that kids really don't understand syllables was when I taught at Louisville High School. For a matter of fact, I'm not being critical, not being negative, my second graders that I taught actually knew more about syllables than my high school seniors. And I think it's because they forget and they don't go back. But when I was working with them, they did this thing. You know what I'm talking about, right? And they were doing this. That really doesn't help much, okay? And I'll tell you why it doesn't help much. And you probably have already discovered this. Kids move their mouth differently. So I would have kids going, paleontologist, no syllables, miss, none. And I'm like, oh, we have work to do, okay? We have work to do. Because their chin didn't move much. They didn't, now I can make my mouth move to the number of syllables if I already know the syllable. Does that kind of make sense? All right? Okay, so what we really want, and then we have the clapping, which is much better, okay? Clapping is much better. But if we get the whole body involved, it is really good, okay? Now, I'm going to talk about high school in a moment, because I know you're sitting there saying, oh, no, yeah, you don't know my high school kids. There's no way they're squatting. Oh, yeah, they will. Let's say the word is pizza, okay? So you're going to start standing up, and then for each syllable, you will do a half body squat, all right? So it would be, I know it sounds funny, doesn't it? Okay, pizza, okay? Woo! Ready? Now let's all squat together, all right? Pizza. Very good. Now, paleontologist. You're advanced, okay? Paleontologist. Abnormal. Abnormal. Oh, no, you must stay down. Doesn't that feel so good? Oh, okay, rain. Rain. Now, that's how that works. But it's so important because when the whole body is moving, the kids actually remember it. Now, what would happen, after a while we would do the squat, and I'm going to tell you, here's what I did with my high school seniors. You have to trick them sometimes because it's just as important for them as other kids. As a matter of fact, our high school kids, our middle school kids, they need to be moving a lot more. Right? And research shows it, every shred of research shows it. But what do as they get older? We do just the opposite of what they need. We would do the squat, and then when I was teaching elementary, when the kids would come in the morning, you know, they kind of trickle in. They don't all like show up at the same time. They kind of trickle in, and I would be handing them an index card. I'd say, now guys, remember last week we talked about the water cycle? I want you to write one word that's important to the water cycle on your index card. And they weren't spelled right. It was all right. So they're all writing all these different words, and then I collect them. So I pick up all these cards, and then we have our group squat. Now they're incredibly excited at this point. Why? Because the words belong to them. So I'm calling out the words. Let's just have a moment, okay? Evaporation. Evaporation. Isn't that fun? Now you know what the kids do? They yell out, cloud! All right, cloud. And they have fun trying to think of what word it's going to take for them to stand back up. And so we do this over and over again. Now, two things that are happening here. Two things that are happening. I want you to go back to the ear. First of all, are we exposing kids to words? Absolutely. Are we analyzing? Yes. Two ways, actually. What's one way that we're analyzing? Yeah, by syllables. What's another way that we're analyzing? By content. We're saying we want it to be related to the water cycle. Then finally, is it rehearsal and review? Yes. Because what we're doing is all those words that they were exposed to during that unit of instruction, we're bringing it back, and we're bringing it back, and we're bringing it back. Because often what happens, the kids understand the gist of the assignment, they understand the gist of the concept, but they don't have the language to talk about it. When my daughter comes home, and she said, Mom, we did the greatest thing today. And she said, we had water, and we put pennies in the water, and we had to predict when it was, there was overflow. I don't even know what it was. But I said, well, what is it that you were learning? Something. And she just stands there. She said, I don't really know what it was called. And then, see, that's what it is. The kids don't, they understand the experience. They understand and they remember it because it was fun. But they don't hang on to the technical language so that they can talk about the concept. Does that make sense? And that's really what we want to give them, the ability to talk about it. All right? Now go back to our middle school, high school friends. What I did when I went into Louisville High School is I kind of fibbed to them. And I said, guys, you will never believe this. Yesterday after school, I went over to Miss Clark's class. Rhonda Clark is one of my good friends. She teaches elementary. And I said, I went to her class. You will never believe what she was doing with the kids. You would never believe it. Now, first of all, remember, it was not true. But our lives are fiction anyway. They don't know. All right? And I say, I have got to show you what she's doing. And what do? Show them the syllable squat. And I said, you've got to get up and try it. You'll never believe it. Get up, get up, get up. And they get up and they're squatting and they're like looking at each other, but they're doing it. And then they go out in the hallway and those big burly football players play on the Louisville football team. All right? They're out in the hall going, oh, Miss Morris has finally lost it. Linebacker. All right? But they're still doing it. All right? So sometimes you have to trick them, but it's worth it. But our attitude about it drives their attitude. So if I stood there and say, oh my gosh, I've got this friend, Rhonda Clark, who teaches at Kamey Elementary, she does the dumbest thing with her kids. She does this little squatting thing and you would hate it, but let's do it. All right? Well, of course they're going to hate it if I hate it. All right? So we want to get them excited. We want to get them up out of their seats and have fun with it. Have fun with the language. Because here's what ends up happening afterward. When the kids are analyzing the words or even taking their spelling test, I watch them, and many of them are doing this. They're sitting there squatting with their fingers. Some of them even get up at the back of the room and they're squatting. Some of them never, for some of them they don't need it. They kind of get it and they can do it and they don't have any problem with it and they never squat this or that, but they know it in their head and they've internalized it already. But it's a great tool for the kids and it's an important. So that's called the syllable squat. And in just a moment, I'm going to tell you the page number, so get a Post-it note ready, and I'm going to have you just go ahead and mark it. Then you can read it in more detail and talk about the different uses and variations for that. The book is organized with what we know about brain research. The first chapter there, the prologue, talks about the gradual release model. I think the gradual release model is one of the most brilliant things to come around. David Pearson and Gallagher developed that. And the whole idea, guys, one of the things that we do often in the classroom, let me show you this graphic. This will be very familiar to many of you that have read the works of course, Stephanie Harvey, Chris Tavani, and all of the work that we have in the areas of comprehension. But you know what tends to happen? And I'm so guilty of this as well. We tend to model for kids and show them what we want, and then we go straight to what? Now do it. Okay, here's what it looks like. Let me show you, and then you go on and practice. We go to the independent level. The big mistake there is, it's what Region 4 calls a sumicide. We kill kids with a sumicide. Right? We assume they know certain things that they don't, and they're not ready to move to independent. So one of the things that's critical for vocabulary instruction is we do lots of guided practice, a lot of think aloud, showing them how we think about language. And this is the area that doesn't get much attention. It's right here, this gradual release. So every single lesson in the book, every lesson is written using the gradual release model. And that's why the lessons look detailed. They're actually not that detailed, except that they go all the way back to modeling in the instruction, and then gradual release, and then going on to end. I must tell you that the gradual release model is everywhere we look in line. I was at Starbucks, my cohort and I were doing some planning, and she comes running out of the bathroom. She said, Alana, they have the gradual release model up on the wall. I said, get out. I ran to my car, I'm not kidding. I ran to my car and got my camera. We don't go to that Starbucks anymore. But I ran to my car and got my camera and took a picture. So I have to show you. Gradual release model at work at Starbucks. See, they don't just say wash your hands, of course. All right? They're going to gradually walk you to independence. All right? So you wet your hands, soap your hands, wash for 20 seconds, rinse, dry, and then, of course, you can't see the last one. It's very important. I'll show you this. You turn off the water with the paper towel. All right? So if ever you were unsure, they walk you through, they scaffold you through to independence. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? All right? So if Starbucks can do it, we can too. So let's just kind of go back and rewind for just a moment. First thing is we want to build an ear. We want to unplug the overhead when we can. You can't always. There are times you have to give kids a lift. Let's be realistic. Okay, there are times you have to give them the lift. But I think what we want to do is do a little bit less of the lift and a little more of the other types of strategies, which we'll get into when we talk about memory. So we want to build an ear. Exposure, analysis, and review. So that's our first anchor of the day. Our second anchor comes when we talk about plugging in memory. Plugging in memory. Because the bottom line is, if we're going to talk about vocabulary instruction, or teaching in general, aren't we talking about memory? Don't we want kids to remember what we give them? Gosh, and I think this thing of sometimes of standardized testing and we drill, and I'm not trying to be negative about it, but sometimes I think it takes away from their ability to learn because we have so much to cover so fast. I think all of us are feeling the stress of that. And when we try to cover too much too fast, it really is what I call drive-by instruction. And we just hope for the best. We hope something sticks somewhere. So I think the more we know about memory system, the better we can help our kids and really understand how to design our lessons. All right? So in your notes, if you go ahead and put plugging in memory, and what's most important about memory is it's very complex. All right? It's very complex. I must give you a little test. Here are the rules. You have to answer together. So say together, together. Together, together. Oh, good. All right. We must answer quickly. So say quick, quickly. Quick, quickly. And we must answer loud. So say loud, loudly. Loud, loudly. All right, I have the test in my hand. What day of the week is it? Oh, it's Monday. Ooh, Friday. All right, Tuesday. What color is the sky? What color is the grass? What color is this paper? What do cows drink? Okay. Now, many of you, of course, said water. That's the first thing that's going to, I'm sorry, milk. That's the first thing that's going to come to your mind. Some of you said water. Somebody said grass, which worries me a lot. Okay. I'm just playing. Okay. All right. Of course, they drink water. Now, I had a GT kid at Millikan who told me once, calves do drink milk. And I said, but I did not say cow. All right. I definitely said cow. So what happened there? Okay, what happened? If I had said take all the time in the world, never in a million years would you have said. All right? So what happened is you didn't give your brain time to dip into long-term memory. You were totally reacting on short-term memory. And that truly is the complexity. I think all of us in here have had those moments and those thoughts that we say, I'm losing my memory. Have you said that before? Something's wrong with me? Once I even went to the doctor, I said, something's wrong. Okay? I can't even remember. I'll be in the middle of a sentence and I don't remember what I was going to say. All right? Or I'll go into a room. How many of you have done this? You'll walk into a room because you're on a mission. There's something you need out of that room. But when you get in the room, you have no idea why you were there. All right? And there's all kinds of reasons for this. And very, very seldom, actually, is it disease-driven. till another point. Most of the time, there's all kinds of reasons. First of all, Diet Coke. Anything with aspartame in it is going to impact memory. It makes you have a little memory problem. Okay, hormones can impact memory. Absent-mindedness, which is my biggest problem. You get so busy doing other things that you never encode it in the first place. So absent-mindedness is one of those problems. Because of the complexity of memory, though, I think we have to kind of focus in. There's droves of books, thousands of research studies on memory. I think some of you have even read some. Right? We want to focus in on the key elements. So back in the day, when many of us were going through college, they told us about short-term, long-term memory. Well, there's a man named Alan Bailey who took that research and said, oh my gosh, it's far more complex than that. Far more complex. And he said even within short-term memory, there's a huge world there. So what I want you to do in your notes, I'm going to give you, there are 3 memory systems that are important for learning. The first is semantic. S-E-M-A-N-T-I-C, semantic. In each of these cases, I'm going to give you what is the memory system, what does it mean, and then what's the big deal? So what? I think we should always ask ourselves, so what? What's the big deal about that? All right, so semantic. Semantic memory are dates, facts, direction, phone number, your significant other's birth date. Now, what's the so what? There's actually 2 so whats on this. It's a big one. All right? The first so what is that the human brain is least designed for this type of memory system. What types of things do people have to remember 1,000 years ago? Yeah, where their food would be found. Survival information. They had to remember where to get their food, how to get back home, the dangers, stay away from that cave, that's where the bear lives. All right? Everything, this is what's important, everything they had to remember was experience-driven. They did not have to remember to pick up a prescription at CVS. They did not have to remember to take their cousin to the airport at 4 o'clock. They did not have to remember to turn in their data report. What they had to remember was based on experience. That's very important, key. All right? So what else is important? Well, let's go back. We said that the human brain is least designed for this type of memory. It's not designed to handle it. Well, the other big so what of that is 75 to 80% of all learning in schools is semantic driven. Wow. Brain's least designed for it. 75 to 80% of all learning in schools is semantic driven. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out there's dissonance there. Problem. Now that study was done before No Child Left Behind. My bet would be now that maybe even more of the learning in school is semantic driven. That would be my bet. With science and social studies coming on board, I fear that it's even more so than it ever was before. Okay? So if we know the brain's least designed, but we know that that's what's happening in schools. In other words, we ask kids to remember math formulas. We ask kids to remember all these details for science. We ask kids, by the way, vocabulary, and you might put a big star here. Vocabulary itself, by definition, no pun intended, is semantic memory, isn't it? We give kids words, we give them a definition. It's semantic in that format. So that's already a problem. Now, what do we do? Because you're like, well, you know what? We do remember all those things. Yes, we do. But what do we do so we can remember to take our cousin to the airport at 4 o'clock? Yeah, there we go. Okay? We write it down somewhere in a calendar, sticky note. All right? How many of you have some kind of calendar with you? If I came and took it during lunch and got rid of it, it would be problematic, wouldn't it? So let's move away from that for a moment and move to the second memory system. As we move to each of these 3 memory systems, the memory systems become stronger. They become more naturally designed as to how the brain processes information. So the second memory system is procedural. Procedural. We remember based on doing something. Okay, may I see your foot for a moment? You need to see this. In your mind, if you can imagine, a perfect pair of Nike shoes tied in the most perfect fashion. All right? Now here's my bet. When she tied her shoes this morning, my bet is she just tied them. She reached down and tied them. She did not say make a loop. make a loop, twist and pull. Is that right? Because if you did, it's okay, you can tell it. All right. So indeed, she just tied them. Why? Because she has been doing that for a while, and she knows how to tie them. But take a kindergartner or a first grader who's just learning how to tie their shoes, and they have to almost tell themselves step by step what to do, right? Because it went from semantic for them to now it's procedural for you. Now here's the danger of procedural memory. Here's the danger. The danger of procedural memory is it's very, very, very strong. Okay? You do something often enough, it becomes autopilot. That's really good if you learned it well the first time. It's really bad if you learned it wrong. Does that make sense? And that's where in our district we're doing a big thing right now on these test-taking strategies. Right? Obviously, test-taking strategies are important. The kids know what to do. But some of them become, I'm going to just give you an example. And again, remember you raised your hand, do not be offended by anything, blah, 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 blah. All right? Okay. Some of our teachers have our kids write next to every single paragraph, and I'm actually speaking from Casey's point of view here, next to every single paragraph, what's the main idea? Well, ideally, that sounds like a good idea because they're practicing. But it's only a good idea if they get the feedback to see if they're doing it right. You see what I'm saying? Because if they're putting the wrong main idea over and over and over and over again, it's becoming procedural. And they're practicing wrong over and over and over again. And so then when they get to the next year, it will take, even the grandest of master teachers can sometimes not erase that misthinking because it's become so solid in the brain, because that's how the brain works. So my daughter's reading a passage on Clara Barton, and she comes to a paragraph that I'm reading what she put next to the side. See, she never got any feedback, so she kept doing the same thing. And it's, of course, the main idea. And it's talking about Clara Barton having all these monuments donated to her. Okay, everybody kind of follow me? Actually, the first thing it tells you is that Clara died, which is very sad. She dies, and they're doing these monuments. Well, Casey puts, what do you think a fourth grader is going to put next to the left side as the main idea? She died. Well, that wasn't the main idea. The main idea was about these monuments that they were giving in her honor. So I said, Casey, I said, well, how do you know that that's the main idea? She goes, because she's dead. And she said, and that's very important. And I said, well, yes, it is, but how did the author make you think that that was the main idea of the paragraph? She goes, the author? She looked at me like, the author? See, because she's thinking what's most important to her. So I had to kind of have a little mini lesson with her about that it's really about what the author wants you to think is the main idea, not what you, the readers. It's not about the readers, it's about the writer. All right? But you see what I'm saying? She practiced it so wrong. My little mini lesson probably didn't help a bit because she's going to go right back to what she was doing before unless we do like we did with the ear and go over it and over it and over it and over again to erase. So does everybody see what I'm talking about how procedural can be dangerous? Another example just to help you with procedural memory, the dangers of it. I talked about the Post-it note. Well, when I get up in the morning, and sometimes I have to do I told you my daughter has epilepsy, I had to call in a prescription. Well, what tends to happen is I forget to pick them up. All right? So I see she's out of medication. I know I have to go pick up her prescription. I put a Post-it note on my rearview mirror. Pick up Casey's prescription from CVS. Get in my car after work, and I say, ooh, yeah, you better stop real quick. I hate that I have to stop because you know how it is in the afternoon. But I know I have to stop, and I'm on my way to CVS. Driving down the road, got the radio on, listening to the news. Cell phone rings, it's my son, wanting to know if he can go outside. I say, no, we have a little, okay? And then suddenly, you know what happens? I'm in my driveway. I'm in my driveway. How could that happen? Well, because you drive home so often that it really is autopilot and your brain remembers based on the procedure. Matter of fact, sometimes I think I'd close my eyes and I would get there. Okay? All right, so that's procedural memory. The last one, the most crucial of all the memory systems, is episodic. Episodic. Huge amounts of research have been done in this area. Remember the gentleman's name that I told you about, Alan Bailey? He's out of Bristol University in England. He's the one who has done phenomenal work on memory. He's the one who said it's not just short-term, long-term. It's much more detailed than that. Right? And part of that detail is this episodic memory. Now, first of all, what is it? What is episodic memory? Obviously based on episode, okay, from that root episode. It is memory based on where you were, who you were with, and what was said during the encoding process. Now let's talk about what that means for a moment. This, first of all, this memory system is incredibly strong. It is strong, it is lasting, it is enduring, and it's almost impossible to erase. First of all, this is a memory. I'm just going to give you an example from when we were in school. Many of us, how many of you have taken a test before? And you're sitting there in the test, and you know that you know the answer, but you can't retrieve it. See, the problem with memory is not storage, it's retrieval. Some neurologists tell us we never forget anything, we just remember it too late. Think about that, all right? We don't forget anything, we remember it too late. And so you're sitting there taking that test, and you can't retrieve it, but you know it's there, and suddenly you remember where you wrote information in your notes. Have you done that before? Okay, you remember where you wrote some notes up to the top of your page, or you can picture where it was in the textbook, or you remember something the professor said, and suddenly it comes back to you. That is episodic memory. When you are absent, your kids will never score as well on a test as when you are there. And that study has been duplicated over and over and over and over again, and the results have never varied. And you know why? Turn to your neighbor and say, you are an episode. Okay? You are an episode. Your kids remember things based on what you said, how you reacted, where you were standing. And those first-year teachers in here, you've only been teaching a couple of years, it really freaked me out the first couple of times. But I'm kind of walking around monitoring, and I suddenly catch the attention. I see that there's a child staring at me, okay, in a stalking kind of way. All right? But have you ever noticed that? They're like looking, like staring you down. And it took me a while to realize what they were doing. They were trying to remember based on me. All right? So when you're absent, they won't score as well. And yes, there are implications for any kind of assessment with that. When your kids take the test in another room, they won't do as well. They will always do better taking the test with you in the room, not because you're cheating, okay? And so, but because you are an episode. And so, of course, we've done some studies. We've taken kids that, I hate to call them bubble kids. I hate the term. I don't think are kids that are kind of borderline, and we make sure that they take the assessment in the room where they learn the. And by the way, the room is an episode as well. So they should test in the room where they learn the information, and they should test with the teacher they learn. Now, due to scheduling, you know that's not always feasible. It can't always happen, but it should happen as much as possible. There is, of course, a downside, and that comes. You've seen that with our veterans that come back from war. You know, they're sitting on a park bench outside, and they hear, you know, they hear a helicopter, and suddenly their blood pressure rises, right? And they feel as if their brain is reacting as if they're there, and that is episodic memory. It is again incredibly strong. Now, again, so what? The so what is we want to decrease the reliance on semantic memory for vocabulary, and we want to move our kids toward episodic memory. We don't do enough letting our kids talk and dialogue. And I know some of you are like, oh yeah, they do lots of talk. All right, but I'm talking about talking about what we're referring to and the words and the language. Okay, so two anchors that we want to hang on to. Okay, anchor one is the ear. We want to build an ear, and the second anchor are those memory systems. Right, we want to move toward episodic memory. And what we're going to do after the break, we're going to start moving through the different strategies. Right, and as we move through these strategies, in the back of your mind, you want to say, okay, how is that building an ear for vocabulary? And how is that moving toward episodic memory? Because the bottom line, guys, it's not about these 30 activities in this book. That's not what it's about. What it's about is doing activities that do those kinds of things. What we want to do then is to be able to analyze the activities that come across our way, that we come across at workshops, that we come across in journals, and say, is that the kind of activity that's going to build the knowledge level that I want in my classroom? And if it's not, then just toss it aside. And if it is, of course, we have the huge